Hello and welcome to the Homesick to Happy Movers podcast. I'm super excited for our conversation today, and we're talking with Natalie Rodriguez about overcoming anxiety and overwhelm, which I feel like is key to anyone who is moving or transitioning to life after the move. Natalie is a passionate and creative wife, a mom of two boys, a best-selling author, and postpartum coach. Over the last 5 years, she's learned to resolve childhood trauma and unknowingly triggered postpartum anxiety, which grew as her son grew. Now she teaches other postpartum moms to find freedom and from the overwhelming anxiety through personal growth, even if they think that it's their duty to hold it all together, which I relate to so much because I used to try to hold everything together, and that is literally a recipe for overwhelm. Natalie, I am so excited to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Keisha. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, and so you just moved to Georgia,
Yes,
right?
ma'am. Yeah.
Yeah. How did your move go?
It was a little bit chaotic because I was 8 months pregnant. And we didn't have jobs lined up when we moved, but we just really had it on our hearts to be here in Georgia. We moved from Florida and had been there basically our whole lives, and we just
Wow.
knew that it wasn't the right place for us. And so, like I said, it's been a little bit chaotic, but it has been an awesome choice.
Awesome. Cool. That's such a big leap of faith too, to
Yeah,
just step
it
out and
was.
go. Yeah, very cool. So could you share your story with us about your anxiety and overwhelm and what it looked like in your life and how you're able to turn things around?
Sure. Um, well, it really started to become illuminated when after I had my first son, who is 8 now. But if I'm being really honest, there were lots of signs of anxiety before then. I just didn't realize that that's what it was at the time because I hadn't really heard anybody talk about anxiety except for, panic attacks. And I didn't think that's what I was having. Turns out it's exactly what I was having, but I thought, just had a angry personality and, maybe I needed anger management classes, but it wasn't anxiety. Um, but then after my son was born, I just got more and more worried and anxious about everything. And it honestly really started to tear my entire life apart, from my relationship with my husband, my relationship with my son. My job was affected by it. And it came to a point where I had one of my angry outbursts at my 3-year-old, and he just looked at me in pure terror. And that was the final red flag that told me I needed to get help, and I finally did. Come to find out that it was really triggered from my mom passing away when I was 14,
Mhm.
and not processing that grief, just kind of stuffing it down like we as women tend to do. Even at 14, I learned to stuff my feelings down, and because I was stuffing them and I wasn't allowing myself to feel my feelings, the anxiety started to mount.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I feel like that's like such a common experience where we know we're experiencing something, but can't name it. Or
Yeah.
like there's something going on, but is it anxiety attacks? Those things, yes, so powerful. Um, so when because you've just moved recently and we're talking to a community of people who have moved. So in your move, or in anyone's move, where does overwhelm show up?
Um, for us, a lot of the overwhelm was just all of the tasks that had to be taken care of before the move even happened, from getting our house ready to sell and packing it up while I was pregnant and with an 8-year-old, um, trying to get everything planned and in place as possible before the move, like doctors and pediatricians and therapists and all of that. It's just so much to do, especially when you're a parent.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, would you consider overwhelm and anxiety to be the same thing, or do they show up differently?
I would say they are not the same thing. However, overwhelm very often leads to anxiety.
Okay, that's interesting. Mm. So, how can you explain more on that, like how overwhelm leads to anxiety?
Sure. I feel like overwhelm is having to deal with more than you can possibly handle. And then the anxiety is where that really manifests between, being worried or angry outbursts, or one of my previous very unhealthy coping mechanisms was controlling everything, trying to just control everything in my life. I feel like that's really when you see the anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what ways can we discover peace when we're feeling overwhelm and anxiety?
I would say that some really simple tricks are things like box breathing, which is where you breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, and then hold that for 4 seconds. It's something that my massage therapist taught me actually very recently when I was pregnant, and I was very overwhelmed and starting to feel anxious about the move. And she said basically it resets your nervous system, and it will immediately calm you down. And in my experience, it definitely does. So I love that trick. And then practicing gratitude is really helpful because your body literally cannot feel both gratitude and anxiety in the same moment. So if you focus on gratitude, and it doesn't have to be big things, just, the everyday little things, it will help you to take the focus off of your anxiety and put it on the things that you want more of.
Oh, that's super good. So, have you done box breathing with your kids yet?
Yes, it's so funny because I actually hadn't, and we use OutSchool. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's like a learning platform,
Okay.
um, predominantly used for homeschoolers, and we're homeschooling him now that we've moved. And so he's displaying some signs of anxiety, as I'm sure you can imagine, an 8-year-old moving, having a new brother,
Mhm.
starting to homeschool. It's been a whole lot for him. So I enrolled him in some classes that were more emotion based, and they taught him some breathing techniques. And I was like, oh my gosh, why didn't I think to teach him box breathing?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Does he like them? The breathing
Um,
technique?
his favorite breathing exercise is the hot cocoa breathing exercise, which is similar, but you
Okay.
pretend you have a mug of hot cocoa and you breathe it in. So it's basically the same thing, but with that imagination um,
Okay.
included,
Yes.
which is very helpful for kids, making it a little more fun.
Yeah. So they're smelling the hot cocoa
Yeah,
and then they're cooling it down, or is that how they do it?
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Very cool. Cool. Um, and also I think like when you mentioned gratitude, like that's also something we can teach to our kids too, is gratitudes and
Yeah.
points of view and picking up on those little tiny pieces of things that we can be thankful for. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what tips do you have for someone who is struggling with anxiety attacks?
I would say one really good thing you can do is check in with yourself daily to see how you're feeling, and to see what expectations you have of yourself or your situation that might not be being met. Because in my experience, a lot of times the anxiety comes from your expectations not being met. We expect things to go one way, and when they don't, it can trigger our anxiety, especially when we're people with a habit of trying to control things.
Mhm.
And then I would say also another really big one for me is seek therapy. I'm a huge advocate of therapy if you're struggling. It doesn't mean that you're weak or you're failing. Like sometimes we tend to think that's what it means. And it might be scary to wade through all of those feelings and emotions, but it is so worth it when you get out on the other side.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. So did you say speak therapy or
Seek, seek,
seek?
seek.
Okay.
Go
Is
look for
that,
therapy.
oh, okay.
Seek out
Okay. I thought you were
therapy.
saying like a certain kind of therapy. So just go
No,
look, yeah, for therapy.
look for
Yeah.
therapy. Yeah.
Yes.
And I will also say something that I'm a huge advocate for is finding the right therapist, because if you don't feel comfortable with your therapist, it's not going to work.
Mhm.
And I feel like so often if we do even get the courage to go out and find a therapist, once we find one, we think that that has to be the one, and we feel like, they're going to get offended if we decide that it's not working for us, or maybe we feel like it's our fault that it isn't working. But like I said, if you're not comfortable, it's not going to work. You have to feel comfortable with your therapist.
Right. Yeah. You have to feel comfortable enough to be able to let your walls down
Right,
and
exactly.
actually talk about the stuff you need to talk about.
Right, and trust them that they know what they're doing and when they give you advice.
Yeah. Yes. Very true. Yeah. So, when you mentioned expectations and that
Mhm.
expectations can lead to anxiety, I really resonate with that because sometimes I find that I am the one who is putting the crippling amount of expectations upon myself. Um, or I am perceiving what other people expect of me without actually asking and communicating what they expect of me. And I just kind of use it as almost like a self-sabotage tool sometimes to just like heap all these like this big hill of expectations upon myself that I try to carry around
Oh,
and
yeah.
perform. Yeah. So how has like the expectations of yourself and other people showed up in your world?
Um, well, you're exactly right. It's I think we tend to do that. I think we all tend to do that where we feel like we need to take so much on,
Mhm.
um, and we forget to ask whether people even want us to take that on.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just a recipe for disaster in our relationships.
Mhm.
Because it can create resentment where there doesn't need to be resentment because the other person didn't even want us to do that,
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
want us to worry ourselves with that. But yeah, e- expectations, that was actually one thing that was a recent revelation for me as we started to move. I had my anxiety under control for a couple of years, but then as we started to the process of moving, I started to feel those feelings and I was like, no, I need to go see a therapist. I was like, I'm not doing this again. I'm gonna, nip it in the bud. And that was one thing that she really helped me to reveal, was that expectations were really um what was triggering my anxiety, because I had this expectation that we would find the perfect house and that my husband would find a job, and I just had expectations of how everything would go, and anytime something, a wrench was thrown into our plans, it just threw me for a loop. And once we started to work on that and recognize the expectations I had and release them, the anxiety started to come back down and I was able to manage it again.
Yeah. That is such a, I feel like a common experience when moving and having expectations because we are, I'll speak for myself. I feel like I could speak for the entire group of movers, but I usually expect a move to go a certain way. And I found that every move that I've gone through, there have been things that I've expected to just work out, or I've expected to just show up and have friends, but there's things that have not worked out the way I planned. And um, when you talked about releasing expectation, that really piqued my interest onto how do you release an expectation?
Well, the first key is recognizing that you even have that
Mm-hmm.
expectation. And a lot of times that's really all it takes is really just seeing what those internal expectations that we don't even know are there, but are kind of poisoning our mind. Once we bring it to the surface, it's like, oh, well, I don't really need to expect that. I don't really need that expectation on myself.
Yes.
And we can find healthier ways to deal with them.
Yes. Awesome. I love it. So just being aware that
Yeah,
it's, and then making that choice that, okay, I'm gonna not hold on to this right now.
right.
Yeah. Yes, I love it. So how can listeners connect with you?
You can find my website at with Natalie Rodriguez. That's RODRIGUEZ.com. And then all of my social media buttons are at the bottom, so they can connect in whatever way they would like to. And then I also have a banner at the top for my free Facebook group.
Okay, awesome, awesome. And Natalie, you have a freebie, a special gift for the listeners who are listening to the podcast today. Could you share with us what it is?
Yes, ma'am. It is a grounding guide. And if you're not familiar with what grounding is, grounding exercises are something that you can use when you are in the middle of a panic attack, to just bring you back to reality. Things like naming 5 red things around you, or box breathing is in there too.
Mhm.
Um, so it's a whole guide with a bunch of different exercises, so you can pick and choose whatever works best for you.
Oh my goodness. Awesome. Awesome. So I have loved our conversation, and I was wondering if you have a few last words of encouragement for our listeners on the podcast today.
Sure. Like I said, if you feel like you are experiencing anxiety, please don't hesitate to find therapy. Um, there's such a stigma around therapy, but there shouldn't be, because it can be truly life changing. And everybody has things that they are going through. Um, so just because you do doesn't make you any different, doesn't make you any worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, I love it. Well, thank you for coming on the podcast, Natalie, and for saving time to chat with us. It's been really great.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.